my wife actually has a coffee cup around here somewhere that says, I got this for attending another meeting that should have been an email, sort of that thing.
Yeah, I've long suspected that those who end up in upper management are people who can just sit through insufferably long meetings and love to plan them rather than do anything else.
When I worked in policy, that's what a lot of it was. It was basically like a skill should have been, do you have good meeting etiquette? Are you good at sitting, acting interested, asking questions that have already been covered the first 5 minutes because you have nothing else to say? That's basically what it is. So what's up?
I don't know. Well, one, I guess, do you mind if I record this?
I don't care.
Okay. And if we want to start talking about things that other people would want to hear, we can start talking about that. I had some questions about education. I had a long discussion with a mutual friend of ours, and he is very firmly in the John Stuart Mill camp of running towards your opposition. And if you want to teach something, then you stack the deck against you in a way.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
What do I think about that? I think, well, personally, in my position as somebody who's producing content that needs to be watched in order for it to be relevant, I'm kind of in this weird position of wanting to be an educator, but also understanding that principally I'm an entertainer and that the education has to be kind of slipped in there. So I kind of have to, I watch myself seeing what gets me attention and seeing how the audience is pushing me, but always needing to understand and return to approaching issues that are contentious in good faith and trying to figure out ways to test myself constantly.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that in terms of education, which I think is a special case, that to me, it's sort of in my opinion, the only way you get things done, you make progress. But in order to, I think, realize that, you have to know something about psychology and about the way people are built. And I think we have a lot of research that shows us that our reasoning skills, reason did not evolve in order to find the truth. It evolved to persuade other primates of our positions. And so that we could form nice little groups of primates who all agree on certain things. And realizing that is the first step towards breaking out of that box and realizing that the only way you're going to get truth is by figuring out ways of putting yourself in positions in which you're not surrounded by people who agree with you and who disagree and who can identify your assumptions. And the key part is, and challenge your assumptions, the key part is that just realizing this, I think I have a good awareness of this, isn't sufficient. It doesn't cover. You can't just say, well, I'm really smart and I accept all those things. I'm familiar with that research. So problem solved. You have to build it into the system and you have to mandate it. And that's the part where I know some educators that you and I know mutually seem to disagree on this point. They seem to think, well, just saying that you're a favor of viewpoints is good enough. And then if everybody in the room all agrees that universal health care is the only way to go or gun control is the only way to go, we're good to go. We'll do a good job of questioning each other. No, you will not. You will not do a good job of questioning each other because you can't, because you don't really believe those things. You need that diversity in the room that have different views in order to challenge you. So that's my.
It seems like there might be some sort of spectrum of assumptions. Like, we don't want to spend 6 weeks debating whether or not the Earth is flat.
Yes.
Right. Or even if the color blue that I see is the color blue that you see. So how do we find, I guess, how do we plan ourselves in a framework or just base ourselves in values that are axiomatic, that are that we don't need to wrestle with because we're all going to assume those? And then where does that start to become something that we need to, is there a complexity threshold of problems or solutions? Or
I think it matters a little bit about what you're talking about the topic or field. That's the most common argument that I've had with people that comes up the most. It's come up with several evergreen professors who I've had private email conversations with as I bring up this point, and they all say, well, are you suggesting that, we ought to have, flat earthers in our, cosmology class or our geology class, and that evolutionary people that don't believe in evolutionary theory or whatever? And I don't think that's a particularly good argument, because I think if the question is a factual question, like, is this the case, a scientific question, an empirical question, that has, in principle, it has truth conditions. It can be true or false. However, this is where I part company with a lot of people. I think most of the interesting questions in the world, and most of the questions, most of the time spent in your typical college course, especially at a place like an evergreen or a liberal arts school, most of the questions you're dealing with are not empirical questions. They're relevant. They come up. The question of how many people are getting abortions and how the procedure is done and in what proportions, that's an empirical question that's relevant. And I don't think that we should hear from somebody who says, well, I know the statistics say this, but I just really believe it's not that. I'm not advocating that we need more of that. But I think it's a mistake to assume that that's what we're talking about. It's not. What we're talking about when we have a debate or a seminar or discussion in class are all of these value-laden claims. And I don't take a particular position on whether moral statements or value claims can be objectively true. I mean, that's a different philosophical discussion. I have my own view. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that it's not obvious that they have truth conditions, that there can be true or false, and therefore we should be very, very humble, and we should be very much not on one side or the other. What we should do is create a situation where people of different views can come together. And your view about the legitimacy of gun control laws or universal health care or complex issues like climate change and what we ought to do about it are the giveaways. There are reasonable people can disagree on these things, and saying that and comparing them to, flat earthers is just, to me, seems to be a really bad analogy, and to me an excuse to keep things the way they are in the academy, and that is 10-1, 14-1, 70-1 liberal conservative ratio or conservative to liberal ratio, which I think is not good, because most of the interesting questions involve value judgments, and in that realm. Again, people can have different viewpoints on that, and they should be heard out. And that's how we can sharpen our arguments and get better. Without that, you just have a recipe, I think, to remain ignorant. But you'll feel good, because you'll know that what you thought was true is true, and everybody around you agrees. I just can't get over all these so-called progressive academics who seem a little hesitant to want to address that. They say, oh, yeah, I don't like getting shouted down. This has got to stop. But maybe, we don't need to go too far. It might not be a bad thing to, I don't really want a conservative, like, speaking up too much in my class. And I'm like, I don't think I think we disagree then, I guess, about what the issue is and how to fix it.
Well, you bring up the concept of humility. And I wonder, can you distinguish that between being humble and being a pushover?
Well, I think I think that humility, and I think I've heard you talk about it too, and other folks, but giving people the benefit of the doubt used to be sort of the presumption, assuming they have good intentions, at least as the default. And I think that is a huge piece of the pie that isn't being addressed and that we need to get back to. And I think that just goes hand in hand with being humble. I mean, I think a good software to run on your brain if you want to get smarter is to try to, because we all have a bias. We all have, I think it's Nietzsche that says, no, you can't conceive of an eye pointed in no particular direction. I think that's right. We all have our biases. The question is, do you A, recognize it, and B, can you, for the sake of pursuing knowledge, can you try to can you try to find yourself neither for or against, in the middle? Just sort of, I'm open to being persuaded, even though maybe on the weekend I spent all my time at Occupy Wall Street rallies. Can I, when I'm looking at the evidence, try to put myself in the position of someone who might see it differently or who is undecided? Now, I just said earlier, I think you can try that. I think it's very hard, but it's worth trying. I think what we need to do is start talking about, what do we do? How do we arrange institutions that enforce that? And this is what, like, I think John Haidt and Lukianoff have called institutionalized disconfirmation. How do we build structures, enforce this challenge, this clash of ideas?
I wonder if, I should phrase this as a question, but I wonder if there's something about the academic institution and how it's developed over time in the last, let's say, 50 years, that has made it very susceptible to this disconfirmation bias. Like this, it seems under assault. It seems like the academic institution was at one point created or shored up to be a place where different viewpoints intersect. And it seemed like it was kind of a safe space for debate, or it was a safe space for people to suspend their certainty and to kind of like suspend themselves over the abyss. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on what made it susceptible to the state that it is now in the last 5 years, where it's become.
Well, I think, I mentioned the word empirical earlier. I mean, I think empirically it just is the case. We have a lot of evidence now that not only is the academy overwhelmingly left-leaning, but that it's the proportion, this has grown, this has become more and more and more of a problem over time. And I don't think we have really good answers to why that's been the case. I think there are some plausible explanations. Like we know that liberals and conservatives differ on some key psychological traits and personalities that are manifestly more maybe common in the academy. I mean, one of the biggest ones is openness to experience. One of the foundational big five personality traits. People on the left are way more open to experience. And that seems to me to be more, in some respects, suited to academic life. This is also why you see, there's differences within the different the disciplines as well. Business schools, you get people that are a little bit more on the organization, that sort of thing. They tend to be a little bit more conservative. But on the whole, I think that, there's probably, we don't know how much of it is self-selection, how much of the academy, just because the way it is, self-selects for certain people, and how much of it is people don't feel welcome. People feel discriminated against. They feel like they get a very clear message when they arrive at Evergreen on the first day and they have their first class, that if you don't hold certain views, you are not really going to have a very good time here. And that dissuades people from coming into the academy, and they leave. I mean, they don't want to be involved in that. What we do about that, I don't know. I mean, I don't know yet. But the first thing we do is actually start admitting it's an issue, and quit pretending that this is only something that's been occurred in the last year and a half, when Yale students started yelling at people. Prior to that, there were all sorts of people that were getting the version of getting yelled at in the quad or having your class ascended on all the time, constantly, but nobody cared, because those people were not progressives. So it didn't matter. We don't, it's fine. Dinesh D'Souza deserved to be shouted down. Okay. But now it's a crisis. And that's the part that I think is we have to get past. If we want to address the issue, is realize this is a problem and we have to take it seriously.
What do you think about an affirmative action on the ideological spectrum?
I'm totally torn, because in general, I can't, just as a matter of morality, I think affirmative action makes very little sense in terms, it's really hard to justify the argument that people should get special privileges or can do more poorly on standardized tests and still get into a school I think that is a very difficult idea to defend intellectually. I mean, I know it feels right to people. I know that it seems like a compassionate thing to do, although I think if you think about it, it doesn't seem very compassionate to the person that doesn't get in because of it, or like the group of Asian students who are suing Harvard right now. However, I'm open to a discussion about affirmative action of viewpoint diversity.
Yeah.
Because of the way I think about diversity. And that is like, why is diversity important? Why is diversity a good thing? It's become such a sacred view that most people have never heard this question. But I mean, I'll ask it to you. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are. I know you've thought about it, but like, why is diversity a good thing?
Because potentially, well, it depends on what we mean by diversity, but if we're talking about diversity of viewpoint, then that will lead to interesting discussions. It will lead to, and by interesting, I mean, it will lead to changes in people, the way that people see things. And there'll be movement, there'll be intellectual movement and change. And that's inherently interesting.
Yeah, and I think I would kind of agree with you. I mean, to me, it's depends what kind of diversity you're talking about. And what I think has been missing that I've always rubbed my eye since it became a sort of runaway virtue amongst everybody in the academy is why is it good to have people that look different and come from different places and have different experiences? It's not intrinsically good. It's not like if you get people with different, skin tones in a room that's just a good thing. I don't think. I think it's good insofar as it maximizes the different viewpoints that we have, so that we can again create this intellectual sort of conflict, which is what we should be desirable, But to just have a bunch of people that look different and have different sexual preferences and different genders and different all this stuff, but all basically agree on the same stuff, that's not diversity at all to me. That's just window decoration. That's just about making people feel good. So, I guess that's where I wish the conversation would go if we're serious about diversity. But it's amazing to me how many people now you just need to say the word and then everybody is supposed to be like, oh yeah, I'm for diversity. But what do you mean? What do you mean you're for diversity of what? And I think that diversity is good insofar as it leads to diverse viewpoints. And we know that all these crude metrics that the schools care about don't ensure that. They don't ensure that. They're not about that at all. They're about this really superficial notion of diversity. So with that said, I'm open to people making an argument, although I'm generally opposed on affirmative action grounds, that, hey, affirmative action might make sense if we're talking about viewpoints, but does it really make sense when we're talking about other superficial characteristics of people that they just happen to have been, born into, that we have no evidence that they actually increase or improve our reasoning skills and allow us to point out incorrect assumptions or challenge people's ideas? I just don't see it.
There's the idea of superficiality comes up because I was thinking about ideological diversity and the possibility of affirmative action for different positions, right? But as soon as anything becomes policy, it seems like it automatically degrades into some sort of superficial rubric. There's no way to guard it against if your department says we need to hire 3 conservative people, then all the applicants need to do is pretend to be conservative in order to get that. So I don't know if you can, with any sort of policy, any sort of affirmative action on the institutional level, if you can actually implement that without it just devolving really quickly into a superficiality. So it seems like it needs to be, like with Haidt might talk about this, like the premises or the values of the tone of the conversation and the ground floor of what the institution is about, or the telos, I guess, will then start to shape how it builds itself, how the university stocks itself with professors and stuff like that. Yeah,
I mean, you have to address these things, in the right way and think about them very carefully. And that's why I said, I'm not decided that this is a good idea, but I mean, there are little things that I think are good ideas that could be done, in fact, are being done. But for the reasons you pointed out, aren't actually followed or enforced or adhered to, because there is such a, it's just a moonscape of views on most college campuses, and especially liberal arts schools a la Evergreen. I mean, at Brown and Yale and Harvard, I mean, at least there is a physics department where you don't see it, 70-1, whereas Evergreen, it's largely, history and humanities, which we know are just, there's no, I mean, it's not going too far to say there's no conservative viewpoints or libertarian viewpoints in those fields. It just doesn't happen. But one of the things you could do is just say, like, most schools say something about, we don't discriminate on the basis of all these superficial traits, which is fine. But some of them say, we also don't do it on the basis of creed or viewpoint or political affiliation. But your problem is a good one, is it says it there. But what do you do when everybody that reads that list just decides to skip over it, doesn't care about that? And that's, I believe Evergreen has that in their discrimination policy. And now they're, launching a campus climate survey, which is a really good idea to do. But I'll bet you everything that I own that there is very little on that campus climate survey that has anything to do with the only kind of diversity that really we should be caring about, or the main one, I would argue. And that is, what do people think here? They're going to avoid that like the plague, because they know what the answer is going to be, and because they also know what the answer is going to be, and they don't really care, because they adopt the view, which is common to us all. We view our moral principles as perfect and immune, and people that disagree with them as evil. So we don't need to know how many people are opposed to the minimum wage or drug legalization, or what they think about the best way to mitigate environmental harm, whether that's regulation or free market. We don't need to worry about that, because those people don't have a different view. They're stupid. And that's why it's easy to not include it. And we don't do that for race and the other sacred groups. But that's something we could do. We could do that more. If you're going to do a campus climate survey, fine. Ask about people's orientations and all that other stuff. But also see how many of your faculty, who they vote for. And that's also an indicator of diversity too. And in fact, I would argue way more important than all the other ones. But they're not going to do that. They're not going to do it.
Is that a legal issue of them asking people who they voted for? Or
I don't know how you could ask people who they sleep with, but not who they voted for. And I hear what you mean. I don't know. I've heard that before. Somebody told me, well, that's too personal. I said, really? I just got a campus climate survey that asked me about, my sex life. And my private parts and the inner workings of my deepest psychology. But yeah, that's right. Voting, that's off limits.
Yeah, that scarlet letter has gone from adultery to ideology now. Like that's what you're branded for nowadays.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It reminds me of that Dave Chappelle bit. You can cut that out, where two guys at work talking, and he's talking about, I was having sex with my wife last night and doing this, and you're like, Jesus, calm down, buddy. Like, hey, I don't want to hear that. Who'd you vote for? And he turns around and says, whoa, Dave. I'm trying to talk about fucking my wife here, and you're getting all personal.
It's weird. It seems that, and I wonder, this is totally speculational, but the libertinism of the progressive movement when it comes to sexuality is very free, very open. The more non-standard your sexuality, the higher of a kind of rank or at least shine you get. But the Puritanism is still there, and it's still, there's still a tightening of morality, but it's switched somehow from sexuality, and but it's still there. It moved over to this other place, and that's just kind of weird to me that it's still the same kind of Puritanism, and we're going to pillory people, but do whatever you want. You can't show your junk, but you can do everything but that, and that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are just different moral foundations that people have that roughly cluster in left and right, but even though their tendencies are averages, you still have examples on the left of people who are open-minded, are open to about everything, like diversity, except for this particular area, like viewpoint. They want diversity of everything except this thing, and that shall not be discussed. Or they want to challenge the status quo, or we're opposed to hierarchy and tradition, and we think you should question everything, right? That's what they say, question everything.
Yeah.
Well, how free are students at Evergreen to question, the wisdom of, whatever, transgender or whatever the issue is at Sacred Group. They're not free at all to discuss that. So there is this sort of, irony there. But I am generally persuaded there was some research that suggested in psychology that this was, sort of the rigidity of the right, or that all of this sort of Puritanism and interest in purity and these sort of norms were solely on the right side of the political spectrum. And then now I think there's been some research now that shows what we would expect, and that is that motivated reasoning, looking for things that confirm our beliefs rather than things that challenge them, is a human problem, not a right or left-wing problem. And when you actually give people on the left, they're just as unwilling to want to consider ideas that they disagree with as people on the right are. And again, the reason why that hadn't come out is, I think, because there's a field too where it's 90% liberal. So the way they study, the hypotheses they test, the way they design experiments was set up in a way that you would have never found that out unless you really stepped outside your moral comfort zone, which is hard to do. Nobody wants to do it. It doesn't feel good. I like to be around people that agree with me. And unless you're forced to, it's going to be hard to do.
Well, one of the problems is with loosely the term the centrists, or people who don't want to align themselves to either way, or people who are wary of rigidity. It comes back to these people. I think I'm one of them. I'm open. I try to be open. I'm motivated to be less motivated with my reasoning. But that is not because I'm not as rigid, I'm not as strong. And it's the more people I get around me to actually make a difference, the stronger, the more rigid we have to be in action. So it seems like the problem with the centrist, independent, the moderate, is that they will always be weaker than the fundamentalists, unless somehow, and I think maybe the certain thinkers in the Enlightenment kind of figured out the equation of how to keep a balance going between the fundamentalists, and then like having a place of moderation that's healthy and growing, like a bias sphere that's big enough for like a very rich, environment of ideas.
Yeah, I think to sort of tie what you're saying into the idea of diversity. So I think that diversity of thought, for example, as I've said, I think is a really good thing. Having a really wide array of attitudes and assumptions on issues that tend to be political and value laden, which is to say most everything we care about, is a good thing. However, there is a sense in which diversity, a deeper sense in which diversity, we don't want diversity. And I think that's also true. I think that's the part that we also need to realize. So I think we all have to share, regardless of where we are on the political, some core assumptions. We need to be undiverse on these things. Like you brought up before, the notion of giving people the benefit of the doubt. I think this is a prerequisite for all this stuff. It's a deeper level than, do we have people that think cluster on the left and cluster on the right? What they all have to share in common is some general precepts like civility, these sort of core ideas that, or what I would say in an academic institution, that we're all here to pursue truth. When we want to, you may want to pursue truth to achieve some left-wing aims. I may want to pursue truth to achieve some right-wing aims. But can't we both see that pursuing truth, which requires civil disagreement, giving people the benefit of the doubt, not jumping down people and calling them out because they say things that, not spending your time listening to everybody, trying to find things to accuse them of being bad people about. If we don't agree on those core functions, then we're never going to get anywhere up here. So we need diversity of views, but really I think we also need, at the end of the day, some basic ground rules that don't vary. And anybody that says they should vary, that comes in, better have a damn good argument for it. They not come in and say, well, you're for diversity of viewpoints. Well, here's a diverse viewpoint. I think it's a great idea to shout and holler at people you disagree with and shout them down. Well, that's one where I think we shouldn't compromise. And I think there's bipartisan support for that. I think there's a lot of people on both sides of the aisle that agree with that, that say, yeah, that's right. I don't agree with this person's politics, but this is not the way you address things or handle yourself. And this is not good. So, e pluribus unum means from many one. I think that it's right that a lot of us now are it's all pluribus, and
No.
we need some of that. And other folks have pointed that out. We need at the end of the day, we need some unity on things. And they don't have to be the complex bioethical issues, but they do need to be on the methodology that we go about deriving those higher level value judgment. That we need to share in common. Yeah. And I think we used to more, and we're not doing it as much now.
There's this interesting argument at Evergreen, and I found it among the students and also among the faculty who were giving orientation for the students, where they apologized about civility, and they frame civility as a way to culturally impose power structure on to people. Like civility, I don't want to go here, but civility is basically, it's whiteness. That's a racial thing that hampers the lived experience and the expression of other people. And it's an interesting attack, and I saw that implemented in orientation at the beginning of the year that resulted in the protests, which is the complete breakdown of civil discourse. And then when the administration 2 or 3 weeks ago, they kind of came out with the fact that the college is not going to be able to function where it has been. We have to do a bunch of cuts. I wasn't there, but I heard that a student group came up and they started shouting about, like how we don't need civility. We don't need this stuff. You guys aren't listening to us. And it seems like you said there was bipartisan support, and I'm sure there was. Most of the people in the room, like, no, you guys, I wonder, like, if anybody could get it through their heads that actually that is what is destroying the institution here, this not civil thing. So I want to extend the benefit of the doubt that there is some truth to tone policing. There's some truth to that, to asking somebody to, quiet down or not be so passionate. But at the same time, it's, in order for communication to be efficient and to actually dive into more and more complex issues, you need to calm down. You need to do a lot less feeling and slowly go through and build up your argument or go through all the data and stuff like that. So it's just interesting that this kind of Marcusean kind of assault on like that value that actually allows for a very strong, moderate position is under assault.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the postmodern element that people refer to. I mean, sort of this idea that these things that people on the left and right used to sort of take for granted, whether you were a Marxist or, some sort of, laissez-faire capitalist, is the idea that, we should not yell at each other. That if you want to persuade me that we should reason with each other, and that reasoning is providing evidence for our claims, backing them up, allowing the other person to speak, et cetera. And those core assumptions, I think, by at least some postmodernists are challenged. You see this in some of the responses by the faculty member. Hey, maybe this isn't the most productive way of addressing this issue. Oh, well, reasoning is a tool of the patriarchy and that sort of thing. Or like you said, which I agree, I've heard that as well, is that, passing judgment that shouting somebody down is not civil and not a productive use of time is somehow racist. I think it's quite the opposite. I think that challenging that, and I mean, what's behind that is saying that, are you saying these people aren't civil? That certain groups of people, whether they be Black or Hispanic or whatever, that they don't see the utility of these tools of, reason and critical thought and respect? I mean, I guess I have way too much of a high opinion of them to ever hear myself say something like that when a professor said, this is not how we conduct ourselves. I mean, I think that seems totally acceptable. And by suggesting that it's not, I think says a lot more about the person that's advocating that than it does about the situation itself, about what their thoughts are. It's that soft bigotry of low expectations.
Yeah.
It's George Bridges saying, well, some of our students are so weak and pathetic that they can't tolerate hearing things that they disagree with. I mean, every student at Evergreen, regardless of their politics, should have bombarded his office with emails and complaints saying, how dare you suggest that just because I'm a first generation or I'm from one of the tribe members or whatever, that I'm different, that I can't hear things, or because my mom didn't go to college. I mean, that's not true, because otherwise none of us would be here. I mean, my parents didn't go to college either, and I felt particularly insulted by that claim. But there is that lurking in the back of all of this. Is this sort of really deep disdain for these people they purport to be advocating for, or at least a really low opinion that I definitely don't hold for them.
Yeah, it's a low opinion of that other group, plus a deep sense of guilt. It's a really toxic combination of these, not taken in turn. Compassion's good, and wanting all these different things are good, but like there's this weird mixture of like those women are stupider and they're softer, so we don't expect so much from them, and this group over here, well, traditionally, historically, they weren't given access to that, so somehow I guess that's affected their DNA, so they can't apply themselves, coupled with this like, well, I inherited all this power and all this money and I didn't really do much, I was just born into it, so I should feel bad about that. It's just so.
Yeah, I think we can over intellectualize it too a little bit too much.
Yeah.
I think by analyzing, which I think you're correct to do in that way, we may not be representing the reality of how it actually occurs so well. I actually don't think most of these people are thinking about these things at all. I think what they're doing is basically they live in a culture and in a group of people and surround themselves with people, and they want to conform to those, like we all do. So even if they don't spend their nights thinking about how guilty I am about all of the benefits I have or whatever, and the oppression that's been meted out against various groups of people at different times throughout history, I think it's really just a matter of, oh, well, those are people that are like me, and I don't like those people because they're not like me, these people that don't talk about that stuff. So white privilege. Yeah, women are weak or whatever, or women need protection from everything at colleges. Yeah. I don't know if they've actually thought about it at all. I just think they know, well, this person is someone who I like to be like, so therefore I'll do that. And that's true for, I think, a lot of political issues. Most people don't have the slightest clue about the arguments in sort of their position in favor of their positions, or don't have much of a clue, but they do know what they think about it. They know that I'm a Republican. Oh, really? What's your view on foreign policy? Oh, well, it's bad to do this thing. That's about the level of it. And it's like, well, wow, how do they have such strong and by the way, not random viewpoints on these things? And I think it's because they're social animals, and you can just look around at their environment and who they hang out with, and that tells you a lot about why they hold those views.
Well, there's two things. There's just a basic processing problem. Not everybody has the processing power or the time to actually research and do all the thinking for this stuff. So we just kind of ascribe, I guess that leads to what you're saying with the group dynamics, but we don't have the time to be an expert, so we kind of just end up needing to make shorthand, coupled with the need or the conversation of politics asking you or verifying each other based on our position. So you have to have a viewpoint. You have to be certain about these things, even though it's impossible for you to be informed about them. So it's like there's a pressure and then like an incompetency, just based on being humans.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. You can't possibly know all you need to know about all the issues that are relevant to time and place. So you outsource that information and you say, well, I judge this person to be credible and I like them, and therefore whatever they say is what I want to, what I'll ascribe to. Yeah, I'm for the, a flat tax is the way to go. Why? Well, I don't know anything. Well, I don't even know what that is, but I know that this person who I really like believes that, and that comports with my more fundamental worldview. If you want to see somebody who I think is doing some of the most interesting work on this, and really dynamic individual, really unique background, look up Daniel Kahan, Kahan. He's at Yale, and he runs a research lab. It's actually a consortium of many research labs called the Cultural Cognition Project. And he's got a pile of really, really good research showing how this operates, again, in practice. And again, it's founded on this basic understanding of motivated reasoning. And he lays out how you can classify people into different worldviews. These worldviews roughly correspond to our political orientations, or have to do with egalitarianism, communitarianism, and then hierarchical versus individualists. And where you cluster there is very, 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 very good predictor of how you consume information about issues. It colors everything. Whereas the old model, it's still common, is that people are arriving at these conclusions after, hours of contemplation, and they're really not. They're just not. They're looking for sources that are like them, and they're going, yeah, I knew it. I knew it. That's right.
It's implicit what was the word? Shoot, I missed the phrase. Contemplation. Contemplation, yeah. It's there somewhere. So do you know enough about motivated reasoning or the concept to I just wonder, can we not be motivated? Or there's got to be a balance, as well as humility, but there's got to be a balance to see, because you have to be motivated in order to have agency. You have to make a decision. You have to have follow through. And you have to have, at least courage, if not conviction, then courage. But at the same time, we know that there's a problem with motivated reasoning. So I just wonder, how do we develop tools to become aware and cognitive of like when we're employing it and the proper, it seems like a 3D kind of chess thing where I'm going to be motivated, but I have to stand above my motivations. Yeah.
I want to say one thing because I thought about it while you were talking that I think you might be interested in. So motivated reasoning is a sort of constellation of phenomena that people have studied that includes a number of more specific phenomena like biased information search, which basically just refers to the fact that when we're looking for things, they've done this in studies, we target things that confirm our beliefs rather than, invalidate them, and biased assimilation, all these different components, but they fall under this category. And one of the most, to me, one of the most interesting findings from this is that there was a prediction that people would be able to fend this off that were higher on what they call need for cognition, the desire, people that are really into the mental life, good at solving problems. They tend to have, more advanced education, et cetera. The prediction would be that these people will clearly be better at this than someone who doesn't have any education. Not only are they not better, they're worse. They do worse, and the thinking is because they have these tools, they have really advanced tools. They're really good at numeracy. They're good at, all the sort of quantitative reasoning. They actually, because they have that toolkit, can employ it to justify what they want to think is true better than people who don't have those tools. It's a really, really remarkable, and this is what I think throws a wrench in this idea that, well, I'm a really smart professor. I get it. Yeah. And so I can just run it in my classroom or at my school and no big deal. And it's like, or you can run it even worse than other people.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the interesting findings. And the original research that did this was in the 40s or 50s, where they gave students from different colleges video footage of a football game. And there was a borderline call in the football game, was he inbounds or out of bounds? And they just asked students, was it the right call or not? And predictably, students at one school thought the call was the right call when it was in their favor of their team, and they thought it was the wrong call when they thought it was in favor of the other team. So there's tons of stuff that has been used to show this, and
that's fine in a sporting arena, right?
Yeah.
In a sense, sports are the place where we're allowed. We give ourselves the ability to you could be for the team, you can be totally motivated in this arena. We've sectioned it out so we don't have to kill each other. There's all these rules and stuff like that. But when you start getting into education, where it should not be the case, and then you have a bunch of really smart people who are good at cognitive, basically a bunch of lawyers in their respective disciplines, then it can very easily snowball into not knowing when the game is being played and when we're not playing that game of teams anymore.
Yeah. I think it's a good analogy. And this goes back to the distinction between, is the college's goal to be, advocacy? Is the goal to change the world? Is that the whole goal of college? Or is there another value there, like pursuing truth for its own sake, regardless if it allows you to change the world or not? And to use the football game analogy, you could go to a football game like most people do, and they're rooting for somebody, right? Very few people go to the game. I don't really care who wins. That's actually how I go to sporting events now. I'm the weirdo. It's like, I don't really care. I'm here to look at people, and I want to see some cool stuff. But do I care which team wins? Not particularly. That to me is what college should be about, or any issue you approach. That should be the ideal. Is that you get there, and the idea you should be thinking is not, do I want somebody to win here? It should be working hard to not want anybody to win, but instead to want to understand the conditions that lead people to win, the plays that are better than others, that sort of thing, examining the rules of the game. I mean, they seem really, I guess, over-intellectualized, but I mean, you ask for sort of the ideal, and I think that would be it, is we need to get out of, I don't think you should approach education like a football game in that sense. You shouldn't have a side. And if you do, you should recognize it, be aware of all of the problems it presents, that you do have a side, and then figure out what you're going to do to correct for those, whether that means getting around people who disagree vehemently with you, reading texts that challenge your ideas. It's going to have to be something like that. Otherwise, you are just the Seahawks fan who's going to see the call the way you want to see it, and that is as in favor of my team and against the other. And that's what we should try to avoid. That's what the referee's trying to do, right? The referee should be doing that. We should be more like the referee and not like the fan, or to use your analogy or to John Haidt's analogy, we should be more like the judge and less like the lawyer. But the first step is realizing that we are not the judge. You can think you're the judge, but you're not being a judge. You're being a lawyer, and we can show you how you're being a lawyer. Look at your syllabus. It is entirely arguments in favor of a particular viewpoint. That is not being a judge. That is being a lawyer.
I think it might be a process of maturity, in a sense, of finding your pleasures not in winning anymore, but finding the pleasure a little bit more removed.
I think you're right.
A little bit more removed, which can lead to just being totally removed, but and totally lofty and detached, over detached from it. But life has a way of plugging us back in, I guess.
Yeah, you can be detached. I guess I hear that concern a lot too. It's like, well, you're advocating a system in which you're completely discounting the role. Maybe you don't have it, Jesse, but other people do, of wanting to impact society and leave a mark and make the world better. And I probably do discount that a bit, but I don't rule it out. But I also think if that's your goal, you're still going to be better suited by you're going to achieve that aim much better in a climate in which you're constantly fighting for, fighting against different views on these things. And so, if universal healthcare is your goal, I think you're going to be a less successful universal healthcare advocate or gun control advocate if you've never even heard any arguments about, or you've been told by your professor that, here's the argument. It's so stupid and so dumb that we're going to spend 5 minutes on it, and I'm going to present it as best I can because I got a PhD from MIT, and that means that I'm really good at it. And it's like, no, you're not. You're not good at it. It just like I'm not good at presenting arguments for other people's positions. I try, but it's hard to do.
Yeah, when your heart's not in it.
Yeah, it really is. So I think, that is the challenge, is how do we speak to people that want to have an impact and feel strongly about things? How do you manage that in an effort to hopefully reach a higher level of understanding? And I don't know. I think I'd like to think that I'm sort of intrinsically drawn. Maybe it's because I don't like taking a team because I'm so scared that I'm going to pick the wrong team. But I just want to try to live in the middle and do the best I can. And I don't know. I think that's it's a hard thing to do.
Is there a bias that you're comfortable telling everybody who watches this that you're wrestling with? Is there like a position that you find that you're trying to become more aware of the opposite position with?
Let me think. What was I was just reading something the other day that I did not want to read because I didn't like where it was going. I think that you had a guest on the other day that I thought was really interesting. It was sort of the T, Traldi?
Oh, yeah. Traldi, yeah.
And he was talking about, really trying to isolate the sort of core philosophical questions. I think, yesterday I was reading some older articles from the 90s on the reparations debate.
Okay.
And while in general, I like many people, including majorities of African Americans, at least according to some polls, was very much opposed to the idea of reparations, in theory, even just the idea of it. But I've been very fascinated by that lately, and trying to imbibe as much as I can first of people who think it's a great idea, like Ta-Nehisi Coates, and actually people before him, that when the debate was much more lively in the 90s, because I think that's really fascinating. It's one that I struggle with because I can see some valid positions on both sides, and I don't have a decided view on it right now, but I think there's super interesting philosophical questions there about notions of collective guilt and sort of intergenerational justice. Does that even make sense? Does it, if you owe me, I owe you money, and I die, do your children have some sort of claim over my children about repaying this debt? These are very complex issues, and the only firm conclusion I draw is not about the issues, but about how I was completely and utterly robbed in college because we didn't talk about any of those issues. All we talked about was, here's the appropriate answer to this question, and if you don't think so, you're a bigot. And that, I'm convinced utterly, I'm dogmatic about that. That is wrong. That is stupid and ignorant and unfortunately all too common. And while we may not have landed on a decision, we should have been isolating these concepts and these issues and discussing them and batting them around. That just doesn't happen.
That's when I go back and I watch my videos and I study myself like the Olympic, swimmer, trying to shave 2 seconds off of my delivery. I see
drawing the circles, like put your hand down, like yeah.
One of the things that I do get passionate about, angry about, and and when I watch myself getting angry, I don't feel bad about, but it's when people are shutting me down or in principle trying to shut conversation down, like Robin DiAngelo opening her talk, her training on white fragility with all the white people need to just listen to me because I got it, and all the colored folks, I'm on your side. And that just pisses me off to no end. But I was with reparations. I wonder is it always about monetary reparations? And I wonder if Evergreen's trying to implement a moral reparation. So with the episode that I just did with the deans pressuring the science department to, boost the grade of this categorically underrepresented person. It's like, well, is this a form of reparation? But is that actually going to give this person a better life?
Yeah, it's no accident that I said that lately I've been trying to sort of bone up on that argument, the reparations argument, is because I see it as very central to a lot of what now we call sort of the social justice ideology and what's going on campus. I see that being a component of this that nobody's really talking about. Brett Weinstein uses slightly different terminology, but I think it's just another way of framing it. So he talks about the idea that it's not about equity or stopping oppression or something like this. It's about turning the tables of oppression, right? And I think that's just another way of restating the reparations argument. There's an element of this that outwardly presents itself as if we are trying to be more sensitive to individual differences or something like that. And then there's an element that I think says, which you can see in the policies, that says, well, it doesn't really matter if whether these incidental characteristics have been the cause of some deficiency that we think is there. What matters is the characteristics themselves, and that they're owed something for that as sort of back pay. And it doesn't really matter if they did more poorly on the test. They're still owed it. That even if this student got a C in your class, we really should just bump them up a letter grade because of an argument about sort of reparations. And I think it just brings up that debate, and that's why we should all study it more closely and have a conversation about it, because it is a core element here. And in fact, I think it may be intentional in a sense that that term is not used, that we create new terms for it, like equity and all this other stuff, because really, to me, it's always struck me for like probably a year now. I've been like, this is sort of like the reparations argument again. A lot of it's just repackaged, and just like these equity reports are, it's reparations, it's affirmative action. We've already had debates about these and discussions. We should continue to have them, but they're not new under the sun. Yeah. And we're just talking about them differently now. Yeah.
So that they can get implemented. It's sleight of hand. Like, well, why start this debate all over again? We'll just call it something else and do it, and then not have the debate.
Well, and when we had the debate about affirmative action, at least the Supreme Court said that affirmative action means you must take affirmative steps to recruit students from disadvantaged backgrounds, right? You should try to, visit high schools, reach out, show how you're sort of communicating with high schools that may have a higher population. It said very clearly that it can't be about quotas. Affirmative action may not be about you must have 14% of this, type of student or whatever. And I've had people admit to me, at Evergreen, and I think it's not uncommon at other schools, is that these equity initiatives, I mean, this individual told me, who's, an employee that's very, very close to the student data there, that the meetings about the equity report were, I think it was expressed very explicitly that somebody said, well, I think affirmative action didn't go far enough. And so that's what this is about for me, is I want to write a report that basically allows us to institute affirmative action, a quota-based idea of affirmative action on faculty hires and students, that creates a hierarchy to make up for past injustices. Mm-hmm. But we don't want to get sued. So how can we talk about it in a way that doesn't say that, And I think that's certainly a central part of this.
And the problem is going to end up being with every faculty member, every professor that has high expectations of students. And then you're going to have low performing students who incidentally have these categories, who are going to be used as pressure to either force the faculty, the rigorous faculty out. It's usually going to be in the sciences, but I certainly it will be in certain sectors of the humanities. But then there will be these other places in the college where it'll be really easy to just inflate the grade and no harm lost. It'll be a media degree or a rhetoric degree, no harm lost. Yeah, you get your credits, you're fine. Go out into the world and stuff. But continually, it's going to be the students are going to be underserved because the expectations aren't going to actually push them to become great people. Because the idea of greatness itself is way too hard to implement without somebody being self-motivated. And you can't you can't do a affirmative action with motivation. You can never do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. I mean, again, I hate to be wishy-washy about it, but I'm just sort of, I'm really excited about the argument. I think it's one that we should all spend a lot more time on. I just am so dissuaded by the fact that it just doesn't happen. I mean, that was the thing that is just so appalling to me. It's not that people hold certain views. It's not that the academy is way lopsided and now increasingly intolerant and aggressive of anything that disagrees with orthodoxy. It's that what that results in is this sort of blatant unwillingness to even engage on the issues. Just no interest. People with a bunch of letters after their name, when I say, I don't know, I think intergenerational justice is really complicated. And they look at me like, what are you talking about? Don't you get it? And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that look. That's the look you get at when you ask that question at a political rally. It's like, we're not here to debate the merits of this. We're here to shout and scream and reaffirm everybody that we're right. And that's the part that is so disheartening for me, especially out of college, is there's just people that you're a critical race scholar and you seem to have no understanding of the arguments against your position. You're poor kids and you're like, what are they learning? I don't know how it's possible. So yeah, I mean, back to Mill, the best expression on the value of free expression and on liberty. I think he lays it out pretty clearly there, is that, if you don't know the arguments against your position, you don't know anything. You really don't. And that if the entire world was decided on the truth of a proposition and only one person disagreed, it would become extra important that you protected that person's right to speak freely. And I would argue in a college institution, it might become wise to not only protect it, but potentially lift it up, give it extra protection.
Center it.
Yeah, how tentative it is, but to give it extra protection so that it could be grappled with and defeated on its own terms out in the open, because it doesn't go away when you just make them not speak about it or remove them from the university. It just goes underground and mutates, and that's what I would like to see avoided more. But I don't see a lot of reason for optimism about it right now. I wish I did, but I just don't. I don't see any. What more could Evergreen possibly need to see that would change whoever decides the board of trustees? I mean, I can't even imagine now what it might be that would make them realize that, hey, maybe we need to have a discussion about what our school's doing. But I haven't seen any evidence of that.
Yeah.